Okay, it's the next day and I had some time to spend with the footage in the editing bay, and I did notice some of those glitches still. But before we get into those negatives, I want to mention that I really do like a lot of things about this camera. This camera by all means is a beast. It features some really cool things, one of which is a wide lens. Now this is an 11mm equivalent, so you get a pretty wide view, even if you're using the D-warp, which is the narrowest view and more natural, so you don't get that fisheye effect. This camera has a lot of different shooting modes, but to summarize, it shoots at 4K and all your popular formats from 24 frames per second all the way up to 120, which means you can get some really nice slow motion footage out of this camera. It has video stabilization, both with its Rocksteady and Rocksteady Plus, as well as their version of horizon leveling. It's waterproof up to 59 feet, has a front and rear touchscreen. It weighs just 5.1 ounces and has a stated battery life of about 2.5 hours. This camera gives you the ability to set a range for your shutter speed, as well as set a range for your ISO. In this case, I'm setting the range of my shutter speed not to go below 1/200. So those values would be 1/200 to 1/8000. And with the ISO, I've set it so it doesn't go over 3200. So with all those great specs, I omitted two on purpose, and that is the fact that this shoots in D-Log color profile and has a 10-bit ability, which means that all my footage is going to be easy to grade and post. So if I'm shooting with the D-Log profile on both my drone, my action camera, and my beloved Pocket 3, it'll be really easy to keep a consistent color profile. And in fact, my Sony camera shoots in S-Log, no matter what log profile you have. S-Log for the Sony, D-Log for the DJI. These things line up quite nicely in post. It's very easy to keep the color consistency throughout those different clips. So as I mentioned, this fits rather nicely into my lineup. I always need an action camera when I'm doing things like snowboarding or even out here. I prefer to have it because it's a bit more rugged and built for these situations. But in that, I also like to make sure that the camera is very reliable in auto settings. Now the reason for that is the sun just went behind the cloud, or I'm on a snowboard where the exposure is constantly changing. I don't have time to stop and address that. So putting this in the auto exposure is a really good idea, not only for this camera, but for any action cameras. And one of the positives of the DJI, as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, I have it set to not go below 1/200. Now that should help with all the jitteriness or the micro shakes that often plague these cameras. However, in my testing, especially when I'm doing any type of panning, I'm actually seeing a rhythmic stutter almost. I've tried different things. I've locked it into 1/200, 1/400, 1/500, just to make sure it's not going too slow, and I'm still seeing the same poor results. Take a look at this footage. This was the other day, but if you look closely, you'll see when I start to move or pan, you'll see little micro jitters. Now take a look at this B-roll shot where I was pulling through a set of trees. Again, pulling or pushing, you'll see those little micro jitters. And for me, for someone who wants to lock in an auto exposure and get on the run, or get on the go, or get on the snowboard, I'm very concerned what this will do at speed. If I can't even rotate this camera or pan without these jitters, sadly, I don't think it's gonna work for me. Okay, it's the next day and I had some time to spend with the footage in the editing bay, and I did notice some of those glitches still. But before we get into those negatives, I want to mention that I really do like a lot of things about this camera. I think the build quality is really good. It's really simple to use, and the interface is standard with DJI, and I find it simple and easy. I also really like the color that comes out of this camera and the ability to have 10-bit in both the normal color profile as well as the D-Log profile. Overall, the image quality coming out of this camera as compared to something like the Ace Pro, and if you haven't seen my review on the Ace Pro, check it out right here. Some of my knocks on that camera, I don't like the way they manage color. I also don't like the fact that it's 8-bit and it will never get 10-bit, and that they're forcing HDR on all of their popular frame rates like 4K 24 and 4K 30. To me, there's no competition in terms of what I'm seeing coming out of this camera in regards to video and image quality. But the negatives are very real. I found these jitters that you saw in the footage. Now, you have to pay close attention. You have to look really hard, but you will see them. And my worry is that it will come at the wrong time and it will ruin a shot that I may have. The point of having an action camera is just kind of that point and shoot, leaving it in automatic and capturing the moment. That's one of the things the Action 4 as well as the Ace Pro does well. When you click it on, it comes on. GoPro, you should take lesson from this. Now, I did contact DJI customer care, and I had the first technician, who was a junior technician, review the footage and say, hey, listen, this is just normal. He suggested I do a couple things that I already did. I tested 3 different SD cards, 3 different computers, and 3 different players. And unfortunately, I still had the stuttering issue. Now, I was passed to a senior technician, and the senior technician agreed that there seemed to be some sort of frame dropping or stuttering going on. He suggested, since I have DJI Care, that I send back the camera and they would either replace it or provide a repair. And for me, that just wasn't acceptable, seeing this camera was only 10 days old. Now, luckily, I was within the return policy, so I had the option to send it back. Now, before I get to that decision, let me tell you about another thing that I found that no one's talking about, and that's an issue with the battery life. DJI states that you can get 2.5 hours of battery out of this camera. Now, on all my shoots, I was averaging less than 1 hour, and that includes not only the footage, but just the time that the camera was on. So I'm not even getting 60 minutes out of 1 battery, and that's a far cry from the 2.5 hours stated. So unfortunately, I can't give you a definitive, I recommend this or I don't. For the first time ever, I'm gonna give an uncertain. I just don't know if I got a bad camera or this is indicative of all Action 4s. If you have an Action 4, please comment below and let me know your experience with this camera. But for now, I have decided to send it back for a full refund. Now, that does leave a gap in my lineup, but I have some other older action cameras that I'll use until I see what comes out with the next generation from DJI and even GoPro. If I do end up breaking down and buying this again, I will do a follow-up review. So if you're not subscribed, please do so and consider liking the video if you found any value in it. I'm Hill Phantom, and I'll see you next time.